I came from money. A lot of money. My parents are both surgeons, and I'm an only child. They said they thought about trying for more after me, but, well, their careers were both really taking off, and so instead they decided to be happy with their one child, their son, and also their careers. For me, that was a whole lot of pressure. Before they even asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, it had been decided that I would be a surgeon just like them. I learned to not ask questions. There seemed to be this underlying understanding that in exchange for this wonderful, wealthy life of privilege that I'd been born into, I would do what they wanted me to do with my life. I have to admit that it wasn't until I was in my late teens that I actually started to question their authority over me. It was listening to my friends that did it. Everyone was talking about where they wanted to go to college, what they wanted to take, and where they saw themselves in 10 years. I was quiet during those conversations, and I found myself questioning if medical school was even what I wanted. I don't know how or why, but for some reason, from as long ago as I could remember, I was obsessed with poor people. My parents didn't mind. I think they even thought it was cute, but I was always wanting to know what I could do to help people struggling financially. They'd donate regularly to the food banks and such, but that's as far as it went. I would volunteer at the food banks. I'd deliver hampers at Christmas, and I'd wanted nothing more than to make a difference in people's lives. Well, one day I was volunteering at a soup kitchen, and I met a guy that changed my life. His name was Charlie. He was homeless, but he hadn't always lived the homeless life. He had come from money too, but he fell on bad times. He got sick, got behind on some of his medical bills, and finally had to file for bankruptcy. It cost him his home, his marriage, and his job. He started drinking, and from there it spiraled out of control. I looked forward to my talks with Charlie. He opened my eyes and called me on the carpet for a lot of things. We were talking one day. Charlie pointed out that while I thought I was a good person and was involved in helping, it was easy for me. He said it was easy to give time and money when you got to go home to your mansion at night. He said that he had enough life experience to know which do-gooders were doing good for the right reasons and which ones were doing it to make themselves feel better about themselves. I asked him which kind of a person he thought I was, and he said the jury was still out about it. I talked to him about what it felt like to have your future decided for you, and he said, well, then don't let that happen. Charlie was the first person in my life to actually ask me what I wanted to do, and it really made me think. I knew my parents would roll over in their operating rooms, but what I was really passionate about was helping people, and it seemed like being a social worker was the best way to get into the trenches and really help those people in need. So I started looking into programs and I applied. I was accepted, and I couldn't believe how thrilling it was to be going behind my parents' backs to pursue a future that was truly for myself. I decided that as mad as I was, my parents deserved to know what my plans were. So I texted my mom and I said that I needed to talk to both of them that night. After dinner, my dad rushed in apologizing for being late. I was instantly nervous. I thought when he hadn't shown up that I was granted another day of parental approval. Well, when they sat down across from me, I blurted out that I wasn't going to medical school after all. I hadn't even finished before my parents were both up on their feet waving their arms in the air in exasperation. They were beyond livid. I heard a lot of phrases like, "After everything we've done for you," and "You're already accepted into med school. Why on earth would you want to become a social worker?" I listened in silence, and I just let them get everything off their chests before I asked them both to sit down again and listen to me now. They looked at each other and sat back down. I was surprised they actually managed to stay silent now while I spoke. I explained how long it took for me to realize that my life as a surgeon was their dream for me, not my dream for me. I asked them if they really wanted me to commit to a life that wasn't what I was passionate about. I mentioned Charlie, and it seemed to make my dad even angrier. He said he didn't understand why the words of an unsuccessful homeless man were influencing me, while his words were falling on deaf ears. "Well, that's just it," I said. "Maybe my idea of success is different than yours." My dad said, "Okay, if that's how you feel, you want to listen to the poor, help the poor, work with the poor, now's your chance." I wasn't sure what he meant until he flat out said it. "You're cut off. You want to disrespect the life that your mother and I have carved out for you, go ahead, but make sure you're really living that life." My mom looked horrified, but I'd never once seen her question my dad and knew she wasn't about to now. I was told to pack a bag and hit the road. I stood up and I did just that. I packed carefully and I took only what I thought I'd need. I was tempted to pack up my MacBook and some of my other pricey gadgets, but I realized as I looked around my room that my parents had given me everything. I hadn't actually earned anything myself, which meant nothing was truly mine. I headed to a hotel, and I asked for a room, but my dad had already cut off my credit card. I was turned away by the clerk, so I headed out to the street. I looked around, and already I had no idea what to do. Everything was my parents', and I was realizing now that I'd have to go out and get a job. My bank account had been closed, credit cards canceled, I had to find a place to stay. Well, I had a lot of friends I knew would take me in, but I felt like that would be against everything I said that I wanted. I wanted to know what it was really like to be poor. I wanted to be able to help people I understood. I started walking the streets and thinking about what my next step should be. I got a bed at the shelter I volunteered at, but I promised myself that was just for one night, and I started pounding the pavement the next day looking for a job. And I quickly realized I was at a big disadvantage. You see, being born into the family I was, I had not worked a single day in my life. I had no references, no resume, and now no help from my parents. I was getting laughed at by managers when they asked me what my experience was, and I had to tell them that I had none. I realized pretty quick I was in trouble. I ended up sleeping in an alley that night. At least it was California and warm. Well, on night 3, I ran into Charlie. He shook my hands and said that he didn't think I had it in me. He asked me where I was staying, and I gestured to where I stood. He said, "I have a better idea for you." He told me that we would need to take a bus. Well, I didn't have any money, so he bought my ticket. He told me that he and a bunch of friends had found this place a month back and that it beat any shelter or alley hands down. We ended up at what looked like a shipyard. It was full of dumpsters. Charlie told me that this was a storage site for the city's dumpsters. They were stored here, cleaned, and then dropped wherever. Charlie had been living in a blue one for the last month, and he was pleased to announce a vacancy had just opened up in a green one next in the row. I looked inside Charlie's and was actually pretty impressed with what he had turned it into. Looked like he had the bottom lined with newspaper and cardboard. He had a ratty old sleeping bag, a couple of books, all his worldly possessions pushed into one corner. I was home, at least for the time being. I made my dumpster as cozy as I could. I couldn't help but smile when I thought of the look on my parents' face if they could just see me now. I was living in a dumpster for almost 2 weeks before I actually got my first job. I was a waiter at a local Greasy Spoon, and I was never so proud in my life. I earned every penny, and I appreciated it that much more. My plan was to save up enough money to come up with enough to rent a place of my own. When I had enough for first and last month's rent, I got a 1-bedroom apartment. I still can't believe my father is a billionaire, but I lived in a dumpster. To watch more animated story videos like this, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments section what you thought about this story.